Alright, in a couple of videos lately, you've seen me drag crawfish imitating soft plastics across the surface and catch redfish and largemouth bass in the marsh. It's really one of my favorite techniques. I rely on it all the time. What I like about these baits, as opposed to say a ribbit, is that you can drop the bait below the surface after you miss a fish, and almost always they'll come back and hit it again. It's kind of like following a topwater with a fluke or a Senko or something like that, except you can do it instantaneously before that fish swims off. So I really like this technique, but not all of these baits are created equal. So I wanted to get them in a pool and see which ones look best on top of the surface. So that's why we're here today. But not only are we gonna look at them across the surface, we're also gonna see how they fall, how quickly, and how they look on a straight retrieve underwater, because those are all techniques that are deadly with these baits. I don't even know what we're gonna call this pool test, but I'll figure something out. But I can't wait to do it. I'm really excited about it. So let me take you real quickly through the baits that we've got and that we're gonna test today. Again, I say this in all the pool tests, it's not an exhaustive list. You can definitely come up with baits that we don't have included here. These are just some that we've fished and that we've had access to, and we want to see how they look. Let me show you what we got. All right, first off is the Larew Punch-Out Craw. Next up is the Yamamoto Cowboy. Next up is the Strike King Rage Craw. Then we got the Zoom Zee Craw. Then we've got the Rage Tail Menace. Then we've got the Raptor Tail Jr. Then we've got the Zoom Speed Craw. Next up is the Googan Baits Krackin Craw. Then we've got the Christy Craw. Then we've got the Berkley Powerbait Chigger Craw. And last but not least is the Matrix Craw. All right, if you've seen previous pool tests, you know that our pole is normally a rake. Actually, we've upgraded a little bit. Now we've got an H&H telescopic push pole. We've got our GoPro mounted on the end. Joel's gonna be following along, checking out these baits, how they look in motion. Joel, what do you think is gonna be your favorite?
I think the Strike King Rage Craw is going to be my favorite.
Have you caught a lot of fish on that?
I have. It's a good bait. It's got a lot of action.
All right, we'll see if the boy knows what he's talking about. Let's take a look. All right, as usual, I'm going to reserve most of my commentary for when I'm at home and I can see how these baits actually look. But first up is the Larew Punch-Out Craw. All right, the Larew Punch-Out Craw is clearly not a bait for fishing across the surface. However, it does look pretty good subsurface on a straight retrieve. You can see in slow motion that the claws have a pretty good amount of action. Now, none of the baits had a lot of action on the fall because we were fishing them weightless, but I included this so you could see the rate of fall and how they look as they're heading down the water column. Now for the Larew Punch-Out Craw, for the topwater retrieve, I gave it a 3. For the subsurface retrieve, I gave it an 8. And it was the third most expensive bait that we looked at, so on price, I gave it a 3. It's a total score of 14. All right, next up is the Yamamoto Cowboy. These are very expensive. Let's see if they're worth it. This episode of Marshman Masson brought to you by Puglia Sporting Goods. Now, I really didn't want to like this bait because of the price, but I just can't help it. I love it. Look at this thing. It looks like an egg beater behind this bait. In slow motion, you can really see the disturbance this thing causes on the surface. And I have to say, it looks just as good on a subsurface retrieve. Even weightless on a straight fall, the claws look pretty good. Now for the Yamamoto Cowboy, on the topwater retrieve, it was about perfect, so I gave it a 10. On the subsurface retrieve, same thing, perfect 10. Now on price, it is really expensive, more than $1 a lure, so we rated that one a 1, giving it a total score of 21. All right, next up is a bait I've been fishing a whole lot lately. It's a Raptor Tail Jr. It's a bait made by Xcite baits. Been having some good success with this bait. Let's see how it looks in the pool. All right, this lure definitely creates a disturbance on the surface, and those claws do a fair amount of wiggling, but it doesn't look quite as good as some of the other baits. Subsurface, however, it really shines. You can see those claws really giving off a ton of action. Now for the Xcite Raptor Tail Jr. on the topwater retrieve, it looked about average, so I gave it a 5. On the subsurface retrieve, it looked pretty good. I gave it a 9. And on the price, it's 77 cents a lure, and that rates it a 5 for a total score of 19. All right, next up is one of the most popular baits in all of North America right now. The Googan Baits Krackin Craw. I can tell you out of the package, it looks pretty good. Hopefully it looks just as good in the water. Yeah, I have to say it does. Those legs give off a ton of action that create an incredible disturbance on the surface. No bass or redfish could fail to notice this thing, that's for sure. Boy, you can really see it in slow motion. And that action doesn't lessen at all when the bait is pulled along subsurface. All right, on the Googan Baits Krackin Craw for the topwater retrieve, it just doesn't get any better, so I rated it a 10. On the subsurface retrieve, same thing, perfect 10. And on the price, it's 86 cents a lure, which makes it our second most expensive bait that we tested, so it rates a 2 for a total score of 22. All right, next up is one of my favorite baits, the Zee Craw. I've caught a ton of fish on this particular lure, probably more than any other that I'm testing today, but maybe my mind will be blown. Let's see. Now up top, you can see the Zee Craw doesn't look quite as good as some of the other baits, but still it looks pretty good. Here in slow motion, you can see one of the legs has a tendency to keep locking up, and that definitely hurts the disturbance it makes on the water. Now underwater, those claws really flap well, and it's here where the bait shines. All right, on the Zee Craw for the topwater retrieve, that occasionally locking leg definitely hurt it, but still it was above average, so I gave it a 6. On the subsurface retrieve, it was almost perfect, gave it a 9, and the price on this lure is fairly inexpensive, 47 cents per lure. That rates it a 7 for a total score of 22. All right, now we got another bait you've seen me catch a lot of fish on. This is the Rage Tail Menace. Not only does it smell good, like coffee, it's also got 2 cups on the back that tend to catch water. This one should look good, or at least I think it will. Let's see. All right, in all honesty, I expected this bait to look better than it does. One of the claws just seems perpetually locked, even though the other's doing its best to create a disturbance. You can really see it here in slow motion. Now retrieve subsurface, it looks really good, with only the slightest hint here and there of a claw lock. All right, the Rage Tail Menace could definitely have looked better on the topwater retrieve, so I gave it a 4. It looked pretty good on the subsurface retrieve though, so I gave it a 9. And as far as price goes, it's 61 cents a lure, and that ranks it a 6 for a total score of 19. All right, now we got the Zoom Speed Craw, a very popular bait that's not quite as high on my list. Let's see if it should be. All right, on the surface, the Speed Craw really doesn't look all that good. The claws keep locking up, greatly limiting the action of the bait. You can really see it here in slow motion. The claws are locked up before they finally get free and start creating a little bit of a disturbance. Now subsurface, it's like a different bait. Those claws are constantly moving, doing their best to draw in any fish that might be around. All right, for the Zoom Speed Craw, up top, not so good. I gave it a 2. Subsurface, however, the bait looked really good. I gave it a 9. Now, on the price, this bait is really inexpensive. 30 cents a lure. That's our cheapest bait that we tested, so that gives it a 10 for a total score of 21. All right, and here we got the Berkley Powerbait Chigger Craw. Of course, being a Powerbait, it smells bad. But apparently to fish, it smells pretty good. Let's see if it looks good. This episode of Marsh Man Masson brought to you by H&H Lure Company. And by Bill Lewis. And by Cito New Orleans. And by Versamax Courts. And by Sportsman's Outfitters. At least on the surface, that would be a big no. The claws lock up and they do not move at all. Now quite the opposite is true subsurface. These claws couldn't look a whole lot better. Now one thing that's not visible from this angle that I can see from the surface is the legs on this bait shake and shimmy the entire time as it's falling. The claws are still, but the legs are constantly moving. It's not part of our test, but it is an interesting quality. Now for the Powerbait Chigger Craw, on the topwater retrieve, it was just the absolute worst. I gave it a 1. On the subsurface retrieve, however, it was among the best. So I gave it a 10, and on the price, 45 cents a lure, really not too bad. It ranked number 8 for us, giving us a total score of 19. All right, next up is the Christy Craw, designed by Bass Pro Jason Christie. I know he's caught a few fish on this. Let's see how it looks in the pool. Wow, does it get any better than this? This bait ranks right up there with the Krackin Craw and the Cowboy. Man, does it move a lot of water. And subsurface, maybe not quite as good as those other two baits, but still pretty darn good. All right, for the Christy Craw, the topwater retrieve was as good as it gets, a perfect 10. The subsurface retrieve was close to that, but not quite as good as a couple of the other ones. I gave that a 9. Now the price, absolutely fantastic, 37 cents a lure. It's our second cheapest lure, so that rates a 9 for an overall score of a whopping 28. All right, now we've got a bait that, come to think of it, I'm not sure I've ever fished, but my son Joel loves it. It's a Strike King Rage Craw. Definitely looks good above the water. Let's see if it looks good under the water. Now at first blush, this lure looks pretty good on the surface. It's definitely moving a fair amount of water and is causing a bit of a ruckus. But in slow motion, you can see that one of the claws is locked up and shows no sign of breaking free. Subsurface, however, the claws just go crazy. This is a great looking bait underwater. All right, for the Strike King Rage Craw, on the topwater retrieve, it was better than average. I'm gonna give it a 6. Subsurface retrieve was about as good as it gets, giving that a 10. And the price at 79 cents a lure rates a 4 for an overall score of 20. All right, now the final bait we're gonna look at is a sponsored product. This is a Matrix Craw. I can tell you I've caught a ton of bass and redfish on this bait. Let's see how it looks in the pool. All right, so since this is a sponsored product, it wouldn't be fair for me to include this in the test and give it a score, but you can see for yourself it looks really good, both on the surface and subsurface. All right, our lowest scoring bait by far was the Larew Punch-Out Craw. It just didn't look good on top, and it's actually fairly pricey. So it scored a 14, and that was followed by 3 baits that tied at 19. It's the Berkley Powerbait Chigger Craw, the Rage Tail Menace, and the Raptor Tail Jr. None of those looked especially good on top of the water. And following those with 20 points was the Strike King Rage Craw. It looked great underwater, but not so good on top. Then we had a 2-way tie at 21 points between the Zoom Speed Craw and the Yamamoto Cowboy. Now the Cowboy looked absolutely fantastic both on top and on a straight underwater retrieve, but that price really hurt it. And following that, with 22 points, also a tie between the Zoom Zee Craw and the Googan baits Krackin Craw. Now just like the Cowboy, the Krackin Craw looked phenomenal on top and on a straight retrieve, but it lost some points on the price. If money's no object, you can't go wrong with either one of those baits. But by far, the winner of this pool test was the Christy Craw, coming in at 28 points. It looked great both on top and underwater, and at 37 cents a lure is a tremendous value. Man, I learned so much from this, just like I do from all the pool tests. I can't wait to put that Christy Craw and some of these other baits to the test on the water. I've fished a good number of them. Some of them I've never fished at all, but that's definitely going to change for a few of those baits. Well, if you got as much out of it as I did, please give the video a thumbs up. Also subscribe to the Marshman Masson channel on YouTube. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. And until next time, if we don't see you in the marsh, we'll see you right here on Marshman Masson.